Part 20. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 192. The first 191 chapter of the text of Ruyi Xiaolang Jun. The top 10 unknowns. The palace examination has passed, and everything has been settled. Tang Ning has nothing to do now. Xiao Ju asked him to go out and relax, but he refused without hesitation. He planned to go to the house later. The drawings were just a reference. He would feel relieved when he saw him in person. Not only Xiao Ju came, but Gu Bai, Kui Lang, and Shen Jian also came together. The three of them have been inseparable recently, and it is unknown what they are plotting. Kui Lang saw a piece of paper on his desk, picked it up and looked at it, and asked, "Is this the policy paper that Brother Tang answered in the palace examination?" Tang Ning nodded and asked, "What's wrong? Is there a problem?" "No, no problem." Kui Lang put down the paper, breathed a long sigh of relief, and smiled. Shen Jian walked over and looked at it, with the same relaxed look on his face. Gu Bai glanced at his answer sheet and asked, "You really don't plan to compete for the top spot, so you are coping with the palace examination like this? Is this coping?" "This is not coping." Gu Bai looked at him, shook his head, and said, "You are going against the court. I am not like you, writing good articles, taking a different approach. There is still some hope. Taking a different approach is good, but your policy essay is obviously off topic." Gu Bai looked at him with a look of regret, and said, "Your first policy essay has a unique idea. If the second one can also be standard, there is still hope for the second place. It's a pity now." Tang Yao Yao, who had just walked into the room, heard this and paused. His face was obviously a little unnatural. She walked to Tang Ning and said, "I'm going shopping with Xiao Ai and Xiru, lend me some money." Tang Ning looked at her and asked in surprise, "Where's your money?" The last provincial exam gamble made Tang Yajing a lot of money. With the money she paid back, she is now a rich woman. Why does she need to borrow money from me? My money is not convenient." Tang Yao Yao looked at him and said unhappily, "Don't be so nagging, Xiru and Xiao Ai are still waiting outside." Tang Ning didn't ask any more questions and took out 2 silver bills and handed them to her. Tang Yao Yao walked out with the money. Her face was not very good, as if someone had stolen tens of thousands of taels of silver from her. After reading Tang Ning's policy paper, Kui Lang's mood was obviously much better. He looked at Gu Bai and asked, "Brother Gu, what kind of official do you hope to be in the future?" Gu Bai waved his hand and said, "Nothing. I just hope to be in charge of compiling the real records and talking about classics and history. That's all." "What about Brother Kui?" Kui Lang smiled and said, "I don't have any requirements either. I just want to be the same as Brother Gu." Tang Ning glanced at them. They were 2 shameless people. Compiling the real records and talking about classics and history were the jobs of the Hanlin editors. Only the top scholar would be awarded the title of Hanlin editor. He was ashamed to be with these 2 shameless guys and walked out of the room. Xiru was standing at the gate of the courtyard. She looked at him and asked, "Brother Xiaoning, we are going to go shopping on the street. Do you want to go with us?" Tang Ning waved his hand and said, "You guys go. I'm going to the house later." He still remembered the scene of accompanying Tang Yajing shopping. She was enough for him to bear alone. Add Xiru and Xiao Ai, if there were 3 people, he would not be able to keep up with the physical strength. On the first day after the palace examination, the examination papers began to be graded. 3 full days have passed. In the entire capital, I don't know how many eyes are looking towards the direction of the palace. The palace examination is different from the state examination and the provincial examination. Each of the 212 examination papers must be graded by 8 examiners at the same time. Therefore, although the number of examination papers is small, it takes a long time. A certain palace in the palace. All the examination papers have been graded half a day ago. Until just now, all the rankings of this provincial examination, except for the top 10, have been ranked. The palace examination is different from the provincial examination. There is almost nothing to argue about. The 8 examiners will leave marks on each examination paper, marking the examination paper level, and finally sorting them according to the circled level. On the table in the front, there are 10 examination papers, which are the top 10 of this palace examination. Lu Feng, the Minister of Rites, glanced over the papers and praised, "Gu Bai, Kui Lang, Shen Jian, not bad, they are worthy of being the champions of Jiangnan and the capital. I think the champion of this exam will fall on them." A trace of doubt appeared on his face, and he suddenly asked, "No way, why is there no provincial champion among these 10 people? Lord Fang, that person is from your Lingzhou. Why don't you look for him carefully? How can the provincial champion not even be in the top 10 of the palace exam? What if we are wrong?" Fang Hong glanced at him and heard the sarcasm in Lu Feng's words, but did not answer. After he sorted out the rankings and removed the name mask, he found Tang Ning's paper as soon as possible. However, although his first essay was rated as a good paper by 7 people, the second one had 8 times S in a row, which meant that even he himself, when marking that paper, mercilessly marked it as the worst. Just a glance, he understood the reason. The second policy essay actually asked the candidates how they viewed the alliance between Chen and Chu proposed by the Chu envoy. This question was not difficult. The court's attitude towards the Chu envoy had already given the answer. Although the Chen-Chu alliance was beneficial to Chu, it was not beneficial to Chen. Helping Chu would be like raising a tiger to harm the country, which would cause endless troubles. However, Tang Ning's answer was different from that of almost all the candidates. He wrote on the examination paper that the people of Sushan are brave and good at fighting, and good at riding and shooting. They are not only a serious concern for the Chu state, but also a serious concern for the Chen state. When Sushan is scattered, it will disturb the peace of the 2 countries of Chen and Chu. Once the tribes are unified, the 2 countries Chen and Chu will be in danger. Even Fang Hong felt that what he said was a bit alarmist. The Sushan people had been at war for countless years, and they had already merged if they wanted to merge. Chen and Chu knew the Sushan race very well, and it was impossible for them to unify. This answer sheet is contrary to the imperial court's views, and it is naturally impossible to be recognized. Beside him, Lu Feng screened the 30 people from the second class again and said in surprise, "No way, the leader of the provincial examination cannot get into the second class in the palace examination. This kind of thing is simply unheard of. No, colleagues, please hurry up. If we make a mistake in this search, we will be missing out on talents, and our sin will be great." Someone took out a test paper at the end and said, "Master Lu, there is no need to look for it, his test paper is here." Lu Feng took the test paper, looked at it, smacked his lips, and said, "It's a pity, it's a pity. This second strategy can be entered into the second class even if you just write it casually, but I don't know what this provincial UN really wants in his heart. What do you think? It's a pity." Fang Hong ignored Lu Feng, who was standing aside and sarcastic, and said calmly, "Now that the top 10 have been determined, let's send them to His Majesty as soon as possible. Don't keep His Majesty waiting." Although Lu Feng wanted to mock Fang Hong again, he also knew the priorities. He put the top 10 test papers together, looked at a eunuch in the palace, and said with a smile, "Excuse me. Royal study room." Emperor Chen looked at the figures walking out and asked, "Wei Jian, how credible do you think the words of the Chu envoy are?" Wei Jian thought for a while and said, "Although their purpose is still to promote an alliance between the 2 countries and their motives are not pure, I feel that the matter is serious and they will not lie to us on this matter." Emperor Chen frowned and asked, "What do you mean? The Wanyan tribe has defeated the Heihan tribe and unified more than 10 tribes on the grassland. Within a few years, it is expected to complete the unification of Sushan feet. Wei Jian lowered his head and said, "You can't believe everything the Chu envoy said, but you can't disbelieve it either. Counting the days, the spies we sent to the grassland will return to Beijing in the near future. By then, your Majesty just ask." As soon as he finished speaking, a young eunuch walked in and said respectfully, "Your Majesty, this is the test paper and list of the top 10 in this palace examination." Emperor Chen collected his thoughts and said, "Send it up." After a while, he picked up a brochure, scanned it, and frowned, "No Tangning." After confirming it, he looked at the young eunuch and said, "Ask them to bring me Tangning's test paper, and Xiao Ju's as well." According to the order, the young eunuch responded and slowly withdrew. As soon as he reached the door, someone strode in from outside. Ling Yun walked quickly to the front, bowed and said, "Your Majesty, this is a secret message sent by a spy from 800 miles away." Immediately a eunuch handed him a letter in his hand. Chen Huang stood up, opened the envelope, took out the letter, and looked at it. After a while, he put down the letter and leaned on the table, his body shaking uncontrollably. Wei Jian's complexion changed drastically, and he hurriedly stepped forward to support him, and loudly said, "Imperial Doctor, please call in the Imperial Doctor quickly." Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 193. Chapter 192 of the main text volume of Ruyi Little Man, Tragedy to Save UN? Third update. I'm fine. Emperor Chen stabilized his body and said in a deep voice, "Summon the 2 prime ministers, the minister of the Ministry of War, the secretary of the Zongshuling, the attendant, and several academicians to the palace." Wei Jian looked at Emperor Chen, bowed and said, "I obey the order." In another hall, Fang Hong, Lu Feng, and other examiners were waiting for His Majesty's decision before making the final ranking, but only one eunuch came who asked them to go back first. Before the first class came out, and the palace examination rankings had not been completed, it was really strange that His Majesty asked them to go back first. Although several people were extremely confused, they could only leave the palace. When we reached the gate of the palace, we saw many figures hurriedly entering. Prime Minister Wang was supported by 2 eunuchs, walking as fast as flying. Behind him was the Secretary of the Ministry of War, who was trotting all the way. Zongshuling had just got off the carriage, and the top in the distance seemed to be the sedan chair of the Lord Attendant. Just by thinking with their toes, a few people knew that something big had happened. Thinking about it again, His Majesty didn't even care about the results of the imperial examination. As soon as they thought of this, everyone immediately became anxious. As soon as Lu Feng returned to the Yamen of the Ministry of Rites, a servant came forward and said, "Master Lu, Master Shangshu told you to go see him as soon as you return to the Yamen." I know. Lu Feng nodded, adjusted his clothes, and then walked to the door of a certain check-in room, knocked on the door, and walked in. Tang Hui sat on the chair without raising his head. He looked at him and asked, "How's it going?" Lu Feng said, "Sir, Tang Ning was ranked at the bottom of the top 3 in this palace examination." "The end of the top 3, Tang Hui repeated, frowning slightly. Lu Feng knew what he meant and hurriedly explained, "Master Shangshu has misunderstood. The test paper is anonymous, and the lower officials can't do anything about it. His second policy essay went too far. The 8 examiners, together with Fang Hong, they all gave him the lowest rank, so he was ranked at the bottom of the top 3. After the palace examination, except for the 3 people in the first class who were immediately appointed as officials, the 30 people in the second class had to go through the civil service process. As for the more than 100 people in the third class, it depends on luck. If they rank low and there is no real shortage in the court, they can only. I have been waiting. As for how long I have to wait, I have good luck for 2 or 3 years and bad luck for 7 or 8 years. I am ranked at the bottom of the top 3. I still want to be a Beijing official. It is almost a daydream." Tang Hui took a sip of tea and said nothing more, but Lu Feng thought of what happened just now and said, "Sir, when I just left the palace, I encountered a strange thing." Tang Hui looked up at him and asked, "Oh, what's weird?" After a while, after listening to Lu Feng's words, the Minister of Rights, who had never shown any emotion or anger, suddenly stood up from his seat and said in shock, "The two prime ministers, the Minister of the Ministry of War, the Secretary of the Zongshuling, and the ministers entered the palace at the same time. And in a hurry." Lu Feng nodded and said, "The official has seen it with his own eyes and there is no mistake." Tang Hui sat back down again, with a look of shock on his face. Among the people His Majesty summoned to the palace this time, there was no one who would stomp his feet in court or tremble 3 times. Your Majesty actually summoned them all to the capital at the same time, regardless of their ranking in the palace examination. What a big deal has happened. Most people in the capital were unaware of the shock that occurred in the palace. They only knew that the examiners for this imperial examination had already come out of the palace, indicating that this imperial examination had completely come to an end and were only waiting for the final results. Listing session. Of course, there are many well-informed people in Beijing, and within a very short period of time, inside information came out. What attracted the most attention was naturally who won the top prize and the other 2 winners. Unfortunately, several pieces of inside information spread from different channels have not revealed this one. It just means that the top 10 candidates for the palace examination have been selected and handed over to His Majesty to determine the top 3, but His Majesty has not yet given the final result. Gu Bai, Kui Lang, and Shen Jian, who have the highest voices in the capital to win the championship, are all among these 10 people. Interestingly, the leader of the provincial examination, Tang Ning, who had been very popular in Beijing, was not among the 10 people. If he is not among the top 10, he cannot be the number 1 pick. This made those who took the risk of betting that he would be the top pick before the imperial examination almost regretted the high odds. However, this also dispelled the previous rumors about the shady affairs of the imperial examination. Some people actually said that there was a shady secret in this palace examination, and the test questions were all written by Tang Ning. How could the leader of the provincial examination use the shady secret to get himself to the bottom of the top 3 in the palace examination? What a shady story, it is pure fart. Before the imperial examination, some people said that this provincial minister was not very good at policy making. Now it seems that this is indeed the case, and it is a pity. He is probably the most tragic provincial minister in the history of the Chen Kingdom. Tang Ning actually learned the news earlier than these people because Fang Hong told him personally. Fang Hong came directly from the palace, explained the situation, and comforted him a few words. Before leaving, he shook his head and lamented the pity. He bluntly said that if his strategy were to take a plain approach, he might have hope of getting into the top 2. Zhongyi leaned her head on his shoulder and whispered, "No matter what the outcome is, my husband is the most powerful person in my heart and mind." Su Ru held his hand. Although she didn't speak, her eyes said everything. Zhongyi suddenly held the hands of the 3 of them together, looked at Tang Ning, and said, "I and my mother have already calculated the dates. The 9th day of the next lunar month will be an auspicious day." She held her hand tighter and whispered, Let's choose that day to get married." Xiru and Xiaoi fell asleep on his shoulders. Tang Ning took a lot of effort to carry them to the bed. Tonight, he could only sleep somewhere else. Tang Yaoyao was sitting alone in the yard. Seeing him come out, she asked, "Are you okay?" "What can happen to me?" Tang Ning shook his head. He was very happy now. The imperial examination was just a process, not a result. Now that he had the result, why did he care about the process? Tang Yaoyao thought for a while and said, "If you are okay, lend me some more money." Tang Ning looked at her for a long time before asking, "You didn't take all your money out to gamble, did you?" Tang Yaoyao did not answer. "Who are you, Betting on? Tang Ning looked at her and asked, "You're not betting on me, are you?" "How could I bet on you?" Tang Yao Yao glanced at him and said, "Anyway, it's not convenient to take out my money now, you can lend me some first." Hearing that she didn't bet on him, Tang Ning was a little happy, but also a little disappointed. He took out a few banknotes from his pocket and handed them to her, saying, "If you don't have money, just ask. At worst, I can support you first." "I don't want you to support me." Tang Yao Yao took the banknotes from him, stood up, and walked out of the courtyard. Halfway through, he stopped and said, "If you didn't win the first place, you didn't win the first place. It's no big deal." Tang Ning smiled and said, "I'm fine, don't worry." "Who is worried about you? You are being sentimental." Tang Yao Yao pouted and strode away. Watching her back disappear, Tang Ning put his hands behind his head, looked at the waning moon in the sky, and sighed leisurely. When he stood up and walked towards the room, he realized that Xiru and Xiaoai were in his room. Xiru and Xiaoai's room was next to his father-in-law and mother-in-law, so it was difficult for him to go there. He stood in the yard and thought about it. The county government had a shortage of rooms. Peng Chen and the old beggar lived in one room, so he didn't have to consider it. Of course, squeezing with Tang Yejing was not an option. Qing'er was just a maid, Qing'er was better off. Her room was too small, and she couldn't even sleep on the floor. He hesitated for a long time, but decided to go find Peng Chen. That night, a high-ranking family in the capital held a banquet in the mansion, and it was a festive occasion. "Lang you have done a great job for our Kui family this time. It would be even better if you could be chosen as the top scholar by His Majesty." Kui Lang was surrounded by countless people and said awkwardly, "This is just a rumor from outside. You can't believe it." A woman in luxurious clothes looked at him and said, "You are so modest in front of your aunt. Your uncle was summoned to the palace by His Majesty. I guess it's for the palace examination. When he comes back, everything will be clear." As soon as the voice fell, a middle-aged man walked in from outside. The woman hurriedly stood up and walked over to ask, "Master, how is it, is Lang the top scholar?" The middle-aged man shook his head and said, "I don't know yet, His Majesty didn't mention this matter." The woman asked in confusion, "Then why did His Majesty summon you to the palace in a hurry?" The middle-aged man sighed and said, "The Wanyan tribe has unified nearly 20 tribes on the grassland. Now it has become the largest tribe of Sushan, and it is still expanding. His Majesty summoned us to the palace this time to discuss the alliance between Chen and Chu." Pa! At the table, Kui Lang's teacup fell to the ground, shattered, and the tea splashed everywhere. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 194. The sudden sound of a teacup breaking caused the room to become silent instantly, and everyone looked over. The woman looked at Kui Lang and asked, "Lang what's wrong with you?" Immediately, a servant ran over and picked up the broken pieces of the teacup on the ground. Kui Lang came to his senses, shook his head and said, "No, it's nothing." There was no abnormality on his face, but there was already a turmoil in his heart. The Sushan people actually united. In the palace examination, the second question was related to this. Almost all the candidates, including Kui Lang, followed the imperial strategy and analyzed the grassland situation in detail. They believed that the Sushan people were scattered and there was nothing to fear, only one person had a different opinion than them. When he saw Tang Ning's policy, he felt relieved. He thought he had no chance of getting into the top 2 in the imperial examination. But who would have thought that the prediction he made in his policy would come true so quickly? When the Sushan people are scattered, there is nothing to fear, but once they unite, they will be a great threat to Chu and Chen. Although he did not enter the top 10 in the palace examination, I wonder how His Majesty would feel when he saw the strategies of the top 10 in the palace examination. What kind of foresight is it to be able to predict this matter before the imperial court? Kui Lang's heart was full of mixed emotions, and he stayed up almost all night. Also staying awake all night was Emperor Chen. Sushan Wanyan tribe annexed most of the grassland tribes and gradually rose up. Once they completed their unification, Chu state would definitely be unable to resist it. They had to take a preemptive strike and suppress the rising momentum of Wanyan tribe. In this way, the alliance with Chu state would not be possible. There can be no further delay. And forming an alliance is not a simple alliance. There are many details that need to be discussed. To what extent the Sushan people should be suppressed, how to ensure the interests of the Chen state, and how to ensure that the Chu state will not take advantage of the situation to rise, all need to be discussed in detail with the ministers. He was thinking about these things in his mind. It was not until dawn that he remembered that there seemed to be one more thing. In the imperial study room, Emperor Chen looked at the top 10 papers of this imperial examination, and it was dazzling no matter how he looked at them. But this cannot be blamed on the candidates. The attitude of the government and the public on the grassland issue is surprisingly consistent. If the secret letter had not introduced in detail what is happening on the grassland now, even he would not believe it. After he browsed through the top 10 test papers one by one, he lost any interest and put them aside. He casually took another copy from the side. Those 2 copies were specially ordered by him. There were marks left by 8 examiners on the test paper. The copy he held in his hand was marked with 8xs. He thought it belonged to Tangning, but after looking at the signatures, he realized that it belonged to Xiaoju. Xiaoju agreed to the alliance between Chen and Chu. The reason was that Chen and Chu had been friendly for generations and had been at peace for a long time. However, the Sushan people were different. They had repeatedly invaded the border and were feuding with Chen and Chu. Sooner or later there would be a big war. Want to fight? The article was not well written, but the blood of the Xiao family is still there. Chen Huang praised it and put it aside. The Xiao family is a family of generals, and the children of the generals follow a different path from ordinary people. In this palace examination, he is the only one who was born in a general. Whether he is impulsive or bloody, the news ahead has been confirmed. His decision: this answer sheet should be ranked in front of those 10 people. He picked up the last answer sheet and looked at it. After just one glance, he stood up from his seat with a stunned expression. The answer sheet of the leader of the provincial examination was judged to be the lowest by 8 examiners at the same time in the palace examination. This was an unusual thing, and it disrupted some of his arrangements. Although it was impossible for the 8 examiners to do anything at the same time, he still wanted to take a look. At this glance, I discovered the reason at a glance. The reason why his answer sheet was judged to be the lowest was because he used examples on the test paper to prove that the Sushan people would be unified sooner or later, and that the Chen state should alliance with the Chu state and take precautions early. This was contrary to the previous opinions of the court. But his prediction was right, and the imperial court was now changing its strategy. Chen Huang sighed and said, "You really didn't disappoint me, you are such a crow's mouth. Wei Jian, summon 8 palace examiners into the palace." Before dawn, the entrance to the Gongyuan of the capital was full of people. It is said that the rankings for the palace examination were announced yesterday, and they are just waiting for His Majesty to delineate the number 1 candidate and rank the top 10. According to the practice of previous years, the imperial court will not let the candidates and the public wait too long, and the next day will be the day when the rankings are announced. Some of those who came early were palace examination students, and most were ordinary people. The expressions on the latter's faces looked more nervous and anxious than those students. "Why haven't you posted a list yet? Whether I still have my 100 taels of silver depends on today." "God bless, God bless Gubai and he will be admitted to the top exam. Kui Lang, Gubai, and others gathered together, looking a little dazed. They looked at them and asked, "Have you all heard about it?" Shen Jian and others looked bitter and said nothing. Finally, someone couldn't help but ask, "Is it true that the Sushan people have unified and the imperial court is planning to form an alliance with the Chu state?" Shen Jian thought for a while and said, "Your Majesty urgently summoned several important ministers of the court to enter the palace yesterday, and the discussion lasted until very late. There should be no lies." "It's true," Kui Lang sighed and said, "I have confirmed it from my uncle. There should be no changes in the alliance between the imperial court and the Chu state." Kui Lang's stone stirred up 1,000 waves, and many students immediately exploded. "What, if this happens, wouldn't our strategy be completely wrong? How could such a thing happen? But the examination papers have ended, and the top 10 have been selected long ago. If everyone is the same, it will not affect the results." Yes, everyone is the same, what are you afraid of? I will never take another imperial examination just because of this incident." After everyone discussed it, their moods calmed down a little. Although what happened on the grassland caught them off guard, fortunately, everyone was in the wrong. The result would be the same as it should be. Shen Jian shook his head and said with a wry smile, "Some people are different." Everyone turned their heads. Who? A fast horse galloped in the distance, raising a plume of smoke and causing pedestrians on the road to retreat. Someone was stunned, and then shouted loudly, "The results of the imperial examination are announced." The crowd went from uproar to silence, and then to uproar again. "Let's make a list. Let's make a list. Why are you here? Come and have a look. Hey, don't be crowded. You don't have any exams. Why are you so anxious? Nonsense, I have all my property in custody, why don't you worry?" Under the gaze of everyone, several knights got off their horses and walked into the tribute courtyard. Not long after, a servant came out, brought a ladder, and posted the red notice on the wall. There are 212 people in the palace examination. According to the usual practice, a total of 5 lists are required. On the first list, there are only 3 people in the first place. On the second list, all the people are in the second place. The rest are on the remaining lists. On the list. As the lists were posted one by one, the cheers from the crowd were not loud. After all, these were the people who posted the provincial examination lists. Now they were just rearranging the rankings. When there were only 2 lists left, everyone's breath was held. Shen Jian scanned the posted list, shook his head and said, "There is no Brother Tang." Yesterday's gossip said that Tang Ning, the leader of the provincial examination, was only ranked at the bottom of the top 3, but they searched all over the third top list and couldn't find his name. Kui Lang looked away from the list and said, "It seems there is no Xiaoju." At this time, the penultimate list has been slowly posted. The first place in the second class, Gubai. Second place in the top 2, Kui Lang. Second place in the top 2, Shen Jian. The 3 people who had the loudest voices in Beijing earlier accounted for the top 3, but no one cheered in the stadium, and some just broke out in an instant uproar. None of the 3 of them made it to the first division. How can this be? Who are the first and third persons? My money. Kui Lang and Shen Jian looked at each other, as if they had thought of something, and looked at the wall of the Gongyuan again. The officer slowly unfolded the first list. There were only 2 names on the first list. First place in Class A, Tang Ning. Second place in First Class A, Xiaoju. Among the crowd, someone looked sallow and collapsed to the ground. Someone was trembling all over, with a naked face, looking up to the sky and laughing wildly, "Ha ha, Tang Ning is the number 1 pick, I got it, I got it." Fortunate young gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 195. The people at the bottom of the list who are waiting for the results of the imperial examination have already exploded. Gu Bai, Kui Lang, and Shen Jian, who are the most vocal, are ranked second. I don't know how many people have lost their fortunes. This chapter was first published on AI.U, Shen, Novel Network. Please remember the URL. There were only 2 people on the first class list. Tang Ning was surprised. Xiaoju, where did young Master Xiao come from? In view of Tang Ning's high odds, a few people bet money on him, thinking of giving him a try. Now they got it right, but who would have thought that the number 2 on the top list is actually Mr. Xiao, and the top 1 on the list? There is only first and second, not third. This is unprecedented in the history of imperial examinations. Who the hell could guess this? Compared with the rioting common people, the candidates at the bottom of the list were much quieter. After the palace examination list was revealed, they already understood why the list was arranged this way, why there were only 2 people in the first class, and why Tang Ning and Xiaoju, who were both off-topic, were ranked in the first class. Because they were right, and all the candidates except them were slapped hard by the facts. Kui Lang sighed and said, "It's not unfair to lose." Even the court and His Majesty were slapped hard, so what could they say? Gu Bai also sighed long and long. I hope there will still be work to compile the book. He looked at Kui Lang and the others and said, "Let's go." Where to go? Ping'an County Government. At the Ping'an County Government office, Tang Ning and Xiaoju were drinking and chatting. It was said that they were drinking and talking, but in fact they were 2 frustrated people getting together to drink. They were ranked at the bottom of the top 3 in the palace examination, so they can be regarded as brothers and sisters. In order not to be hit by Gu Bai, Kui Lang, and others, the 2 of them simply did not look at the rankings. This was probably the first time that Tang Ning felt that he and Xiaoju were the same. Xiaoju was already 3 points drunk. He took a bite of the chicken leg and said, "These cowards, what do the Sushan people have to be afraid of? They just fight with real swords and guns until they are convinced. How can the prairie people do it? Well, what happened to Shan Kishi? Think about General Huo, General Wei, and General Li. Which one is not a good man with strong bones? Although Xiaoju looks like a pretty boy, he is actually quite tough on the inside. This may be part of Jiangmen's character. Unfortunately, he can be tough on the inside but not on the outside." He raised his glass to Tang Ning and said, "To be honest, I admire you. I don't care about the imperial examination. You actually dare to tell the truth. For this reason, I give you a toast." Tang Ning clinked glasses with him and took a small sip. The results of the palace examination have come out, and his future path is probably clear. The first 3 people in the palace examination, if nothing unexpected happens, will enter the Hanlin Academy. After several years of internship, their future will be unlimited. Starting from the second class, the treatment and grade will be slightly worse. Those ranked lower in the second class will be sent outside the capital. As for the top 3, most people have to wait for the court to find a real vacancy. At the end of the top 3, after the imperial examination, they can just wait at home honestly. As for the specific waiting time, it may be 1.5 years, or it may be 10.5 years. The line is long. Tang Ning probably won't leave the capital, nor will he wait at home. After he takes the imperial examination, he still has to help the imperial hospital revise books. I really don't know what he will do after he finishes revising the books. Gu Bai and the other 3 walked in from outside the courtyard. Xiaoju glanced at them, waved and said, "Shut up, you 3. I'm not interested in which of you is the number 1 scholar. If you're here to drink, just sit down. If you're here to show off, just roll as far as you can." Kui Lang smiled bitterly and said, "We are not the number 1 winner." "What?" Xiaoju was startled, with a smile on his face, and said, Could it be that someone else picked your peach for you too? Kui Lang bowed his hand to Tang Ning and said, the number one winner is Brother Tang. Xiao Ju's face darkened and he said, Kui, that's not interesting. We know how we did in the exam. If Tang Ning can be the number one scholar, then I can also enter the first grade. You are Yujia. Kui Lang looked at him and said, this time, Yujia, there are only two of you. Xiao Ju looked at him with a sneer, took off one of his shoes, held it in his hand, pointed at him and said, don't think that because your uncle is a court servant, I won't dare to slap you. If you continue to be so sarcastic, don't blame me for being rude. Gu Bai took a deep breath, stepped forward, and spoke slowly. Your Majesty summoned all the examiners into the palace early this morning. The situation on the grassland has undergone some changes. Among the Sushan tribes, the Wanyan tribe has risen and has the potential to unify the tribes. The alliance between Chen and Chu is inevitable. So, in the second step of the palace examination strategy, only you two are right. The list has just been posted at the entrance of Gongyuan. There are only two of you on the first class list. After Gu Bai finished speaking, he cupped his hands to Tang Ning and Xiao Ju and said, congratulations. Are you telling the truth? Xiao Ju was already mostly sober. Although he felt that it was impossible for Gu Bai to lie about this kind of thing, he still found it a bit unbelievable. Although Tang Ning was very surprised, she did not doubt what Gu Bai said. The rise of a certain Sushan tribe is a fact, but the court doesn't know about it yet. Chu state is adjacent to Sushan, and they have been feuding for a long time. News will always come faster. I didn't expect that the court would get the news in such a timely manner this time. In other words, he made the right bet? Xiao Ju still didn't believe it, so he walked out of the hospital and said, no, I have to go and see for myself. Tang Ning also stood up and strode towards the yard next door. Naturally, this good news must be told to Xiru and Xiaoi immediately. He walked into the room and didn't see them, only Tang Yao Yao. How about them? Tang Yao Yao looked at him and said, they are out. Tang Ning didn't look at the list today, so she couldn't tell Xiru and Xiaoi to help him look at the list. Unexpectedly, Tang Ning was the first person to share this matter with him. Tang Ning looked at her and was about to speak, but he swallowed the words as they reached her lips. This time, Fairy Tang didn't hold him in custody, and it seemed that the money he had taken out was quite a lot. I guess she would regret it, beat her chest and cry bitterly when she heard the news, right? Although she has no breasts at all. Tang Yao Yao looked at him and asked, what do you want to say? The results of the palace examination were out, and Fairy Tang would have to know sooner or later. She had to cry when she should. Tang Ning thought about it and decided to tell her. He walked to Tang Yao Yao, pressed her shoulders and said, sit down first. Tang Yao Yao was pinned down on the bed by him, opened his hand, and asked, if you have anything to tell me, do you want to borrow money? Tang Ning took a deep breath, then looked at her and said, I won the top prize. Tang Yao Yao was stunned for a moment, then stretched out her palm and placed it on his forehead, asking with concern, what's wrong with you? Do you feel any discomfort? Tang Ning opened her hand and said, it's true. Yesterday's news was wrong. The list has been posted at the gate of Gongyuan. Are you really not feeling uncomfortable? No. Tang Yao Yao looked at him and finally believed it. She nodded and said, oh, I understand. Tang Ning looked at her in a daze. What was her reaction? Shouldn't she be beating her chest and regretting that she didn't bet on being the number one pick in the first place? Shouldn't her intestines be almost green with regret? He thought about it and felt that it was normal. Tang Yajing was a person who wanted to save face. Even if she secretly hid under the quilt and cried at night, she would not lose her composure in front of him. It's okay. Tang Ning patted her shoulder and comforted her, what's our relationship? If you need money, just come to me. I'll support you first, and then I'll just deduct it from your profits. Tang Yaoyao glanced at him and said nothing. Tang Ning looked at her and asked, by the way, who are you taking into custody, Gu Bai, Kui Lang, or Shen Jian? Whether it was Gu Bai, Kui Lang, or Shen Jian, they actually asked their Yao Yao to turn her elbows outward and wait for him. Tang Yao Yao stood up, patted his shoulder and said, very good, you didn't disappoint me. Tang Ning was stunned and asked, what do you mean? Tang Yao Yao looked at him and said calmly, I'm keeping you. Tang Ning was stunned for a while before asking in a trembling voice, how much did you deposit? Tang Yao Yao thought for a while and said, not much, just the ones I won last time, I pushed them all out. Tang Ning counted on her fingers. After last time, Tang Yejing's net worth was probably around 100,000 taels, so she took it as 100,000 taels. In this palace examination, he was not favored by others. The odds were higher than those in the provincial examination. It was even taller when it was over, probably more than twice as tall as Gu Bai, Kui, Lang, and Shen Jian combined. It looked like 8 times. What is 100,000 taels multiplied by 8 times? Tang Ning's legs softened and she sat on the bedside. After a long time, she looked up at Tang Yao Yao and said, how about you raise me? First release of this chapter like Have Voice Novel Network, please remember the URL. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 196. Tang Yajiao made a lot of money this time. 1 second she was bankrupt, and the next second her net worth was close to 1 million. And all of this was closely related to him. What made Tang Ning even more distressed was that he won the top prize and it was Tang Yao Yao who earned hundreds of thousands of taels of silver. Not even a penny of it belonged to him. He raised his head, as if the person standing in front of him was not Tang Yao Yao, but a moving silver mountain. Standing in front of Tang Yaji, I always feel that she is radiating with light, making people unable to open their eyes. He walked outside the door and saw Zhongyi and Su Aryu walking in together. The two women looked at him with a different look on their pretty faces. Zhongyi walked forward and looked at him blankly, Mr. Tang Ning smiled, pinched her face gently, and said, I did what I promised you. Su Aryu raised her head and looked at him. Although she was smiling, her eyes were sparkling. In the Ping'an County Government Office, Zhou Mingli had just finished hearing a small case, and he couldn't wait to walk out of the county office and ask a government official, has the results been announced for the imperial examination? The Yamen servant shook his head and said, my subordinates have been here all the time. I don't know the situation over there in Gongyuan. As soon as he finished speaking, a man beat the gong and ran through the street in front of him. When he reached the county office, he stopped and shouted loudly, congratulations to Lingzhou Tangning Tanggongzi High School for winning the first place in the first class examination. First A, first, Zhou Mingli stood there blankly, as if he had been struck by lightning. At the same time, the Xiao family. Congratulations, Mr. Xiao, for winning second place in the first class of the middle hall examination, the servant who announced the good news shouted loudly, and when he took the banknote handed over by the butler, he was stunned in place with an expression of disbelief. In the lobby of the Xiao family, the gray-haired old man sat on a chair, stood up quickly, looked at the housekeeper and asked, first and second place, are you sure the person who announced the good news didn't go to the wrong place? The butler's face was full of excitement and he said, Master, it's confirmed. It's our Xiao family. The young master passed the first grade and came second. Xiaoju walked in from outside the door. As soon as he entered, he looked at the old man and asked doubtfully, Dad, did you ask His Majesty to arrange for me to be ranked first and second this time? I still want to ask you, the old man looked at him and frowned, did you take the wrong medicine? Why did you come back with an A-level score and a second grade? Dad, you are not looking for His Majesty. Xiaoju's face became more suspicious and he murmured, "Is it really because of that policy?" Tang family. Tang Jing had just returned home, walked into the room, and asked a woman in the room, "Where is Shui-er? Isn't she back yet?" The woman shook her head and said, "She went out early in the morning, and I don't know what happened." Tang Jing turned around and walked out of the yard, and saw a figure carrying a small bundle and sneaking into the yard. "Stop!" Tang Jing said loudly, and the figure was startled, and the baggage in his hand fell to the ground, revealing several stacks of banknotes wrapped in the baggage. Tang Jing glanced at it and knew that the total of these banknotes was not 100,000 taels, but probably 70 or 80,000 taels. Her monthly income was only 100 taels. Tang Jing's expression changed, he looked at her and asked, "Where did you get all this money?" Tang Shui hurriedly picked up the baggage and said, I won it by gambling." "You won by gambling," Tang Jing said with a sullen face. "Tell me honestly, where did you get all this money?" Tang Shui looked at him and said seriously, "I won it by gambling. I bet that my cousin would win the top prize, that's why I won so much." Tang Jing was startled when he heard this and was a little speechless. If he had bet 10,000 taels instead of 100 taels like his daughter, he would be the one carrying the burden now. He coughed lightly and asked, "Then where did your previous 10,000 taels come from?" "That's what I won by betting that he would win the provincial exam." Tang Jing took a deep breath, then looked at her with a calm expression and said, "You don't need the money now, so Dad will keep it for you. When you need it later, Dad will give it to you." "No, I want to keep the money myself." Tang Shui shook his head and said, "If this money goes into Dad's hands, you can't get it back. This is the dowry I won for myself, and no one will give it to me." She picked up the little bundle, walked under the courtyard wall, and said, "Dad, I'm going to find my sister-in-law." Tang Jing watched her figure disappear on the other side of the courtyard wall, shook his head, looked in a certain direction, and pondered for a long time, not knowing what he was thinking. In a side hall of the Tang family, Tang Hui was standing in front of the window, looking out the window. Tang Chi was sitting in the hall, holding a teacup in his hand. The tea in the cup was cold. I don't know how long it took. Tang Chi put down his teacup, stood up, and said, "Brother, he is now the #1 scholar inscribed by your majesty. He will be awarded the title during the ceremony. From then on, he will stay in the capital and his future is unlimited. He appears like this in the capital in front of others, someone will know about it sooner or later." There was a lot of helplessness in his words, and it was indeed helpless. If the Tang family had shown an accepting attitude towards him from the beginning, the situation would have been different at this time. He is the #1 scholar in the imperial examination, and based on what he has shown before, he is unmatched by all previous #1 scholars. Such a person only needs to train in the Hanlin Academy for 2 years and become familiar with the affairs of the court before he can officially enter the court. His promotion speed is far unmatched by others, and his future is limitless. With this help, the Tang family became even more powerful, but unfortunately, they messed up the matter from the beginning. Now, he is the #1 scholar and has officially entered people's sight. He is not something that the Tang family can move if they want. Tang Hui did not speak. Tang Chi was silent for a moment, and then he spoke again, "Brother, this matter requires your decision." Tang Hui put his hands behind his back and was silent for a moment before he finally spoke. "You can handle this matter." Tang Chi looked at him and nodded, "I know." After the palace examination was posted, there was a big disturbance in the capital. The disturbance began when the yamen runners found some casino guys in the dark alleys of the capital. These people either had their arms removed or their ribs broken, and they looked very miserable. The yamen runners did not ask anything from the mouths of these casino guys, but according to witnesses, the person who did it was a masked woman. She was very good at martial arts and won a lot of silver bills in the casino. As for why she clashed with these casino guys, it must be that these casinos were tempted by money, but they didn't expect to encounter a hard point. After the palace examination was posted, 5 casinos in the capital were closed in just one day. In addition, there are police officers patrolling the riverside in the suburbs of Beijing for 12 hours every day. In one day, no less than 10 people are fished out of the river. In addition to the palace examination announcement, there are also more rumors in the capital in the past 2 days. The rumor is about the new champion Tang Ning. The rumor spread from nowhere, but it spread very quickly. It is said that the new champion Tang Ning has 1,000 connections with the Tang family in the capital. At first, some people disdained it, but as various clues became clear, the people who did not believe it at first began to waver. More than 10 years ago, a major event happened in the Tang family. The second daughter of the Tang family was dissatisfied with the family's forced marriage and ran away from home. It was not until more than a year later that she was found by the Tang family. From then on, she lived in the Tang family and did not go out. From then on, no one saw her in the capital again. Most people in the capital did not know about this major event, but as long as they asked a little, they could confirm whether it was true or not. Calculated, the age of this new champion seems to match a certain time, and most people began to believe this because at a banquet, Tang Shui, the eldest daughter of the Tang family, beat Lu Tang for this new champion. At that time, people thought that Tang Shui had some kind of unclear relationship with him. Now it seems that another reason can also make sense, and it makes more sense. If this is true, then this new champion can be said to have a background that is all-powerful. The Tang family is in its heyday in the capital, and with this relationship, his future career will definitely be smooth. Before and after this imperial examination, His Majesty seemed to be deliberately suppressing the Ministry of Rights and the Tang family, but who would have thought that the final winner would still be the Tang family? You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 197. Tang Yao Yao, who became rich overnight, bought gifts for everyone, including her father-in-law and mother-in-law, Xiaoi and Xiru, and even Qing Er, who always opposed her. Tang Ning also had a gift, of course. Tang Yao Yao gave him a box of good tea. Tang Ning usually didn't drink much, and didn't know much about tea. He didn't know what Tang Yao Yao meant by giving him a box of tea. It would be better to give him hundreds of thousands of taels of silver. This way he could build a better house and build an indoor swimming pool in the back. Summer is coming, just right to use it to escape the heat. Tang Yao Yao looked at him and asked in confusion, "Swimming pool?" Tang Ning nodded and said, "The weather will soon get hot. After you finish practicing, you can soak in the water. It's very comfortable." Tang Yao Yao was somewhat moved by what he said and asked, "How to practice?" "Give me 10,000 taels of silver, and I will take care of this matter." Tang Yao Yao looked at him and said uncertainly, 10,000 taels. 5,000 taels is actually fine. 5,000 taels. 1,000 taels can't be less. Are you sure? 100 taels, less than 100 taels, this thing can't be done. Tang Yao Yao used to be stupid and stupid. Tang Ning was worried that if she continued to be stupid, the wealth that Mr. Tang had saved with great difficulty would be cheated away by others. I don't know when she became smart. Not only did she have a unique vision and a way to make money, but she was not so easy to cheat. Tang Yao Yao handed him 100 taels of silver notes, and then asked, "Have you heard the rumors outside? You mean that violent woman who beats people everywhere and will never get married?" Tang Yao Yao's face darkened, and he said, "I'm talking about the Tang family." "What do the rumors about the Tang family have to do with me?" Tang Ning stood up and said, "I'll arrange for someone to dig a swimming pool." Although Tang Yejing was smart, she didn't know that the 100 taels were enough to dig 2 swimming pools with some left over. He took advantage of her nearly 1,000,000 taels, and if he couldn't even take advantage of her dozens of taels, he would feel too aggrieved. Tang Yaoyao watched him leave, with a trace of worry on her face. The palace examination has ended, and the list has been posted, but this imperial examination has not yet ended successfully. According to the practice of previous years, after the imperial examination, the court will hold a Qianglin banquet for the newly promoted Jinshi. This ceremony has been passed down since the Song dynasty. To this day, although the ritual system has changed greatly, the name has been passed down. The date of the Qianglin banquet is the 3rd day after the palace examination results are posted. Now that the palace examination results have been posted for 2 days, there is still no news about when the banquet will be held. This is because everyone in the court is worried about something bigger and more important than the Qianglin banquet. The Wanyan tribe of the Sushan people is about to complete the unification of the tribe. The civil and military officials are discussing how to deal with it. How can they think of holding a banquet? This matter has been put on hold. In previous years, there were always some interesting things happening at the Qianglin banquet. For a long time, it was the topic of conversation for the people of the capital. However, the capital has never lacked new things, and there are always some things that can make the people talk about it with relish. Compared with what happened in the distant grasslands, they are actually more interested in the gossip of the powerful officials in the capital. Of course, the powerful people don't have any big news every day. Recently, these new Jinshi are the focus of everyone's attention. This imperial examination, together with the new Jinshi, has too many unexpected things. First of all, there are only 2 people in the first class. Everyone probably knows the inside story now. They just think that the new champion and Xiao Gonggai are really sharp-sighted and are ahead of the court. Everyone is convinced of this result. Interestingly, the Xiao family is a family of military generals, but according to the Imperial Examination Convention, the first class of the palace examination must enter the Hanlin Academy. As the only heir of the Xiao family, Xiao Ju, the young master Xiao, is likely to become a civil servant. Of course, although the Xiao family has declined and has few people, a lean camel is bigger than a horse. What's more, the Xiao family is a very special existence among the wealthy families in the capital. As long as His Majesty is still there, the Xiao family will be able to stand firm. From this point of view, no matter which path Xiao Gonggai will choose in the future, there will be no obstacles at least in the next 10 years. Perhaps, the Xiao family, which is on the verge of decline, can be reborn in his hands. Of course, although Gu Bai and Kui Lang are only ranked 2nd, their future must be bright. The Gu family passed down poetry and books, and there were people who served as university scholars from generation to generation. Although they had no real power in the court, they were respected and had a huge influence. As for Kui Lang, everyone only knew that the Kui family was a big family in Jiangnan and Kui Lang was the champion in Jiangnan, but they didn't know that Kui Lang's uncle was the current Minister of State and played an important role in the court. In comparison, only the identity of the new champion was not impressive. Even though he was the 2nd champion who won 3 consecutive championships since the founding of the Chen state, he had no background and no backing. Of course, this was just everyone's previous thoughts. With the end of the palace examination, the identity of the new champion was gradually revealed. No one thought that he was the abandoned child of the Tang family more than 10 years ago. I'm afraid that even the Tang family did not expect that more than 10 years later, the child they abandoned would create such glory in the capital. There have been rumors in the market for 2 days, and the Tang family did not come forward to refute the rumors, allowing the rumors to spread. This is inconsistent with their usual behavior and further confirms the speculation. Unexpectedly, I thought that the new number 1 scholar was a counterattack by a poor student, but I didn't expect that he would have such an identity. Why isn't this a counterattack by a poor family? The Tang family abandoned him early. What's the use of such an identity? The number one scholar has stolen the limelight so far. I wonder if the Tang family will accept him again. While the people in the capital were discussing, in the palace, Chen Huang stood up, walked to the window, and looked out the window. Wei Jian, he suddenly said. Eunuch Wei took a step forward and immediately said, I'm here, old slave. Chen Huang thought for a while and asked, do you think he will let me down this time? Eunuch Wei smiled and said, Your Majesty has always been very accurate in judging people. The person Your Majesty likes will naturally not disappoint you. Chen Huang smiled and said, I hope so. Tang family. Tang Zhao looked livid, shook his head and said, No, I won't go, whoever wants to go can go. Tang Qi looked at him with a stern face and said, Your eldest brother is not in the capital. If you don't go, do you want me to go in person? Tang Zhao strode towards the door and said, I don't care, I won't go anyway. Stop, Tang Qi said loudly, looked at him and said coldly, if you don't go today, don't come back to this house. Outside the door, Tang Shui looked inside, then quickly exited and walked into another courtyard. She grabbed the woman's hand and said happily, Sister-in-law, he has passed the exam and the second uncle has already planned to invite him back. The woman's face did not show happiness, but worry. Tang Shui looked at her and asked doubtfully, Sister-in-law, aren't you happy? The woman looked at her and said softly, Shui-er, follow me and see for yourself. Tang Shui looked at her and nodded slightly, okay. Qing-er, wearing the beautiful red hairpin given to her by Tang Yao Yao, jumped in from the courtyard and said, Uncle, someone is looking for you outside. Wait a minute, don't mess with the positions of my chess pieces. Tang Ning, who was playing flying chess with Tang Yao Yao, stood up and reminded her. If I want to win against you, why should I cheat? Tang Yao Yao waved her hand and said with disdain. Tang Ning walked out of the yard, looked around, and reached out to move her chess piece forward 2 spaces. Tang Ning walked to the yamen gate and saw a carriage parked in front of her. Tang Zhao was standing next to the carriage. When he saw him coming out, he said with a sullen face, My father asked you to go back to the Tang family. Tang Ning glanced at him, turned around and walked into the yamen. Stop, Tang Zhao quickly stepped forward, pointed at him, and said, Don't be so shameless. Even if my father and the others admit you, I won't recognize you. Tang Ning turned her head, looked at him, smiled and said, Get out. Fortunate young gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 198. After Su Mei left, Tang Ning sat alone in the study, sorting out his thoughts. It was obvious that both Su Mei's master and the middle-aged woman he had captured from the state of Chu had some big plans. From the fact that she left the second prince and ran away alone, Gong Sun Ying's purpose for doing things for the grassland was not simple, and Tianrunju had been operating in Beijing for many years and had close ties with many big figures in Beijing. Its hidden power was beyond imagination. The goal would not be to make Tianrunju the #1 catering brand in the state of Chen. What exactly did this group of people want to do was a question that Tang Ning could not figure out. He did not think about the things he could not figure out for the time being. Since he had already caught her, he would not let her go so easily. It would be a pity to give her a handle. If he directly handed her over to the court, they could do whatever they wanted to do with her. He picked up the pen again, but did not write a manuscript, but began to write a memorial. Someone from the palace came just now and asked him to report in detail what he encountered on this trip. A lot of things happened along the way. The princess was not sent away, the princess was not married back, the grassland people made trouble all the way, and the younger brother of Chu State turned over and became the elder brother. Such a big thing happened. Although it was not the fault of the delegation, there should be an explanation. After writing the memorial, he walked out of the study and saw that the yard was quite lively. Xiao Xiao was practicing martial arts. With the guidance of the old beggar, she made rapid progress. Tang Ning came back this time and found that she was much more cheerful than before. A large part of this was due to Fang Xinyu. Lao Zheng's daughter Nanan stood next to Xiao Xiao and learned in a very realistic way. Nanan is 5 years old this year. During the time when Lao Zheng and he went to Chu State, Xiru and Xiaoi helped take care of her. During this time, Xiaoi taught her to read and write, and the women at home dressed her up beautifully. After 6 months of not seeing her, she was no longer the snotty girl who followed Fang Xinyu around. The butcher's daughter actually looked like a young lady from a young family. The old beggar sat on a chair, watching Xiao Xiao practicing with satisfaction, and then looked at the little girl next to him. He turned his head and asked Zheng the butcher, "Butcher, is this your daughter? How can a rough guy like you give birth to such a pretty girl?" Old Zheng squatted on the ground, took the old beggar's wine pot and drank a sip of wine, and said, "Nanan's mother is beautiful, she takes after her mother." The old beggar looked at him, and it was hard to tell whether the expression on his face was surprise or envy. He curled his lips and said, "Such a beautiful girl, can you be attracted to you?" Old Zheng was indifferent, shook his head, and did not answer. Tang Ning came over, looked at Lao Zheng and asked, "What are your plans for the future? Will you take Nanan back to Lingzhou? Nanan is already 5 years old. When she grows up, she can't kill pigs and sell meat with me." Lao Zheng looked at the small place where he practiced martial arts, wiped the wine on his stubble, and said, "I plan to stay in the capital and let her read some books. Girls should read more books and be well educated, like Miss Zhong, so that they can marry a good family in the future." He stood up, looked at Tang Ning, and said, "If you think it's okay, I will stay here and do some work of killing pigs and sheep on weekdays. You can pay me according to your own will. Let a master like Lao Zheng kill pigs and sheep. Sheep is really a waste of talent." Tang Ning waved his hand and said, "If you want, you can stay here for as long as you want. You don't have to do any work." "That won't work." Old Zheng shook his head and said, "If you don't work and just eat for free here, you don't even have any face left, right?" The old beggar sneered and said, "You still know how to save face?" After saying that, he was stunned for a moment, then jumped up, grabbed his collar and asked, "Butcher, what do you mean?" The old beggar and old Zheng had a quarrel. Tang Ning walked to the pavilion where Xiao Ru and Xiao Yi were. Not long after he sat down, he saw Fang Xinyu coming in from outside. She was followed by Zhao Yuan, and a little girl was beside Zhao Yuan. Tang Ning had seen this little girl once. She seemed to be the granddaughter of Prime Minister Wang's family, and was also the sister of the Wang family mentioned by Zhao Yuan. Zhao Yuan ran over and asked, "Sir, did you bring the rouge I asked you to bring?" Tang Ning asked Qing'er to bring the wooden box over and handed it to Zhao Yuan. He opened it and looked at it, and immediately laughed. He counted the rouge in the wooden box and murmured, "This is for my mother, this is for my sister Wang." The little girl named Wang standing next to him laughed. "This is for my sister Zhang, this is for my sister Bai, this." Zhao Yuan was still talking to himself, not noticing that the little girl next to him had pouted. After he finished counting, he took out a box and handed it to the little girl. The little girl folded her arms, turned her head and said, "I don't want it." "Why?" Zhao Yuan was stunned and asked, "Didn't you want it a long time ago?" The little girl pouted and said, "Why do you want to give it to Sister Zhang and Sister Bai?" Zhao Yuan touched his head and said, "Because I promised them." "Humph," the little girl looked at him and said, "You can only choose one from us." "This." Zhao Yuan showed hesitation on his face. The little girl looked at him, stamped her feet, and ran away quickly. "Hey, Sister Wang, don't run, wait for me, be careful not to fall." Zhao Yuan hugged the box and hurriedly chased after him. Zhong Yi watched him run away and shook his head and said, "Prince Run is still so young, he only knows how to make girls happy. So are you also said with some amusement, the little girl of the Wang family is angry, let's see how he chooses. Tang Ning shook his head and said, he is just too young, children make choices, adults. Zhongyi looked at him and asked, what's wrong, sir? So are you also blinked and looked at him. Sir. Tang Ning looked away and shook his head, saying, sirs won't ask like the little girl from the Wang family. Although adults won't ask like that, they will also encounter the same problems that children encounter. Tang Ning didn't eat much during lunch in the afternoon. He was thinking about how to tell them about Zhao Man and Li Tianlan. At night, he usually wrote in the study. Xiao Yi would accompany him to read books, and Xiao Ryu would stand by to help him grind ink or calculate the accounts of the store. Tang Ning didn't write today and was a little absent-minded. After thinking for a long time, he looked at them and said, I have something to tell you. Zhongyi and Su Ryu both raised their heads and looked at him. Tang Ning thought for a moment and said, actually. Zhongyi looked at him and asked, actually, the princess likes you, my husband. Tang Ning was stunned, looked at them, and murmured, you. We already knew it. Zhongyi looked at him and said, because the princess likes you, your husband has to go to Chu and bring her back safely. She looked at Tang Ning again and asked, are you on the way? No, no, Tang Ning waved his hands and said, we didn't do anything. There was nothing wrong between him and Zhao Man. Although she had kissed him forcefully before, he didn't even stick out his tongue that time, it was nothing. Zhongyi looked at him and said, so my husband has accepted the princess. Tang Ning was about to speak, but Zhongyi continued, before my husband left, I already knew that the princess liked my husband. She is of noble status, and she has worked harder for my husband than I have. Since my husband has accepted the princess, it means that he has made up his mind. If I object, I would be a jealous woman. She and Su Ryu had discussed this matter during the day, and she was very calm at the moment. Xiao Ryu and Xiao Yi's reactions to this matter were much calmer and gentler than Tang Ning had imagined. He originally thought that he would have to sleep in the study for at least a month, but he didn't expect them to be so calm. He coughed lightly, looked at them, and said, actually, there is one more thing. Zhongyi looked at him and said in surprise, what else? Tang Ning looked at her and asked, do you still remember Miss Li? Cool night. Tang Ning sat alone in the yard, cold and hungry. Facts have proved that when people make an inch of progress, they should never think about moving forward a foot. The consequence of taking an inch is that he will be sitting here alone in the middle of the night, starving. The moonlight was bright, and a figure flew over from outside the wall, looked at him, and asked, what are you doing here? Don't worry about it for now. Tang Ning looked at Tang Yaoyao and asked, do you have anything to eat? Tang Yaoyao glanced at him and said, wait. She climbed over the wall and flew back a while later, handed him a box of cakes, and asked, what are you doing here in the middle of the night? Tang Ning ate a piece of cake and asked, aren't you sleeping too? I was about to sleep, but I heard some noise here, so I came to see. Tang Yaoyao sat opposite him and said, what happened? Tang Ning looked at her and asked, we are best friends. Can I trust you? Tang Yaoyao waved her hand and said, stop talking nonsense. Speak quickly. Tang Ning swallowed a piece of cake and said, this is a long story. Tang Yaoyao said impatiently, let's make it short. Some things happened during this trip to Chu. Tang Ning looked at her and briefly told her story. Finally, she said, that's it? Princess. And Li Tianlan. Tang Yaoyao sat opposite Tang Ning with her back to the moonlight. Tang Ning couldn't see her expression, but could hear that her voice was trembling. At a certain moment, he suddenly felt his hands empty. The cake was taken away by someone. Tang Ning stood up and said, I'm not full yet. There was a sound of breaking wind in his ears. Tang Yao Yao stood on the wall of the courtyard, looked back at him, and said through gritted teeth, "Why didn't you starve to death?" Fortunate young gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 199. Chapter 198, The Best of Both Worlds. Today's dinner table was extremely quiet. Zhongyi and Su Ru ate in silence. Zhong Mingli drank alone. Halfway through the meal, Chen Yuxian finally couldn't help but ask. "Ning are the rumors about you and the Tang family true?" Tang Ning put down her chopsticks and nodded, "It's true." There was silence at the dinner table again. After a while, Chen Yuxian looked at him and said, "No matter what decision you make, we will support you." Tang Ning smiled, raised her head and said, "This is my home. This is the only home I have." Although God sent him to this world inexplicably, in some ways, he was not treated poorly. Tang Ning is a person who knows how to be content. She doesn't aim too high, and she doesn't have endless desires. If she can live in peace and stability for the rest of her life, it's okay not to be a top scholar or something like that. But this identity still has some benefits. After this time, there is no possibility of reconciliation with the Tang family. He is not arrogant enough to think that with his white body, he can compete with the Tang family who covers the sky with one hand. The Qianglin banquet will be held in 2 days. If nothing unexpected happens, there should be about 3 months of vacation after that, and then he will go to the Hanlin Academy to take up his position. Xiaoju, as the second in the first class, should be in the Hanlin Academy like him, but yesterday I heard from him that he should still be a military officer, but his position would be higher. Congratulations. Li Tianlan walked in from outside and sat down opposite him. Tang Ning looked at her and said, "Congratulations to you too." Li Tianlan congratulated him for being the top student in high school. He congratulated the Chu envoy for achieving his mission. After this time, the momentum of the alliance between Chen and Chu has become unstoppable. He hasn't seen Li Tianlan in the past 2 days. He must be very busy. Chen Guo's attitude towards Chu has changed 180 degrees in a short period of time. In the past 2 days, not only Chen Guo's courtiers have been very busy, but also Chu Guo's. The envoy is actually busier. Li Tianlan shook his head slightly and said, "Congratulations now, it's still too early. Chen Guo just agreed to form an alliance, but there are conditions for the alliance. If the conditions offered by Chu state cannot satisfy them, we don't know when we will talk about it. Things on the grassland are already urgent. The 2 countries actually have to negotiate terms before sending troops. This seems a bit stupid, but it is also true. No one is willing to do anything that is not beneficial." Tang Ning thought for a while and said, "Actually, there is no need to rush to form an alliance." Li Tianlan looked at him, and Tang Ning looked at her and asked, "Which one is Sushen's second major now?" After the Wanyan tribe defeated the Heihan tribe, the Jiagu tribe became the second largest tribe of Sushen. The Wanyan tribe rose rapidly. The Jiagu tribe also sensed the threat and united with more than a dozen surrounding tribes. Now we have been in a stalemate with Wani Umbu for a long time. Tang Ning asked again, "Where is the third part?" The Shuhu department is far away from these 2 departments. The Wanyan department needs to annex the Jiagu department before it can encounter them. Tang Ning looked at her and asked, "Do you think Jiagu Bulletin can beat Wanyan Bulletin?" Li Tianlan thought for a while and said, "The overall strength of the Wanyan department is stronger than that of the Jiagu department, and it has abundant supplies. If we give them some time to continue to grow, the Jiagu department will be destroyed in 2 years at the latest." Just as Tang Ning was about to speak, a figure ran in from outside. King Run ran in from outside and said happily, "Congratulations on winning the top prize. My father said that you will work in the Hanlin Academy in the future, so I can see you often." Tang Ning looked at him, thought for a moment and asked, "His Royal Highness Prince Run, are you here to thank me again?" I'm here to congratulate you for being the top pick in high school. King Run looked at him and said, by the way, what is your family eating today? Tang Ning pointed to the side and said, we'll talk about what to eat later. Your Highness will play there for a while. King Run ran over to play Ludo alone. Tang Ning looked at Li Tianlan and asked, where did we just talk? The Wanyan tribe is the largest part of Sushan's tribe and has sufficient supplies. It often raids the Chenchu border and steals a lot of weapons and supplies from the Chenchu two countries. With their expansion speed, the Jiagu and Chuhu tribes can last for up to 2 years. Tang Ning nodded, looked at her, and said, it is a traditional virtue to help those in need. Jiagu and Chuhu are short of supplies, so we can sell them supplies. If they are short of weapons, we can sell them weapons. Whatever they need, we can help them what to sell to them. Li Tianlan was stunned, and then asked after a moment, what do you mean, let the Sushan people deal with the Sushan people by themselves? Tang Ning asked back, aren't they always one of their own against their own? Li Tianlan looked at him and pursed his lips slightly. The reason why the Sushan people are not strong is because their tribes, just like countries, have been fighting endlessly for resources for hundreds of years. In the past 2 years, the Wanyan tribe has risen too fast. The tribe cannot resist, but in fact, they are not in harmony with each other. If the Jiagu tribe and the Shuhu tribe become stronger, the rise of the Wanyan tribe will be curbed. Materials are scarce on the grasslands, but Chu State's rich real estate can provide them with the food they need, and even weapons. The grasslands are rich in cattle and sheep, and their war horses have also been the envy of Chen and Chu for a long time. Under normal circumstances, the Sushan tribes would never exchange them for these, but today is different from the past. If the two tribes of Jiagu and Chuhu, or those small tribes don't know how to adapt, they will be annexed by the Wanyan tribe sooner or later, which is not what they want to see. Supporting these two tribes can not only stop the Wanyan tribe and form a check and balance on the grassland, but also benefit from it. In this way, the alliance between Chen and Chu does not seem to be so urgent. And this can also greatly reduce the bargaining chip offered by Chen State, allowing Chu State to pay a lot less. Before that, they only thought about the threat posed by the Sushan people to the Chu State, and only thought about forming an alliance with the Chen State to fight against the enemy. However, they did not expect that there was such a way to get the best of both worlds. She took a deep look at Tang Ning, stood up, and said, I want to go back first. Tang Ning knew that she had a lot to do every day, so she waved her hand and said, go ahead. It was the best time for her to leave now. Tang Yao Yao and Xiao Yiziru had gone out. When she came back and saw Li Tianlan later, something might happen again. After Li Tianlan left, King Run ran over from the side and said, you are so amazing. You can actually get the top prize. They say it is very difficult to get the top prize. He looked at Tang Ning and asked expectantly, can I study with you? Tang Ning had heard Fang Hong mention that Prince Run had not liked reading since he was a child. His Majesty also turned a blind eye to this. Could it be that this little fat man had become enlightened by his own stimulation? Tang Ning looked at him and asked, what do you want to learn? Learn to cook. In a certain hall of the palace, Wei Jian handed over a letter and said, Your Majesty, this is a letter from the Ministry of Rites. Arrangements for the Qianglin banquet have already begun. Chen Huang opened it, looked at it, put it down, picked up a piece of pastry from the plate, and asked as if he remembered something, why didn't you enter come over today? Wei Jian smiled and said, Your Majesty, have you forgotten? Yesterday, Your Majesty promised His Royal Highness King Run to leave the palace to find the number 1 scholar. It's strange, why does you enter like him so much? Chen Huang thought for a moment, shook his head and said, forget it, he has great talent, and there is no harm in letting you enter learn more from him. A young eunuch walked in, bowed and said, Your Majesty, Prime Minister Wang wants to see you. Chen Huang nodded and said, Xian. After a while, he looked at the old man walking into the hall and asked, "What does the Prime Minister have to say?" Prime Minister Wang bowed his hands and said, "Your Majesty, the good alliance conditions that were about to be discussed yesterday, the Chu state envoy suddenly said that they would discuss it again." "What?" Chen Huang stood up, looked at him, and asked, "Didn't they beg for an alliance? Why are they regretting it now?" Prime Minister Wang thought for a while and said, "I feel that they seem to be less anxious to form an alliance." You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 200. When it comes to understanding the Sushan people on the grassland, Chen state naturally cannot compare with Chu state. It was also the first time that Tang Ning had a deep understanding of the situation on the grassland. Because of the rise of the Wanyan tribe, the Sushan and other tribes also united to form two major tribes headed by Jiagu and Chuhu. But in terms of strength, these two tribes are worse than the Wanyan tribe. This will create a very embarrassing situation. Chen state and Chu state are not in alliance. Sooner or later, Wanyan tribe will unify these two tribes and destroy Chu first and then Chen. If Chen and Chu formed an alliance, they would not be facing the Wanyan tribe. This is the same as Chen Chu's attitude towards the grassland. The grassland is a mess of loose sand, and Chen and Chu will let it go. Once the grassland has a tendency to unify, the two countries will immediately form an alliance. The grassland treats Chen Chu the same way. The two countries are on their own, so they have time to slowly fight and annex them. Once the two countries join forces, it will be obvious that they are going to kill them. As long as the leaders of these three tribes have a little bit of brains, they will fight first, and then wait for the combined forces of Chen and Chu to cut leaks. Whether it is the Chen state or the Chu state, alliances are necessary, but if you want to be the fisherman who benefits, you have to quietly sabotage them first. Forming an alliance with great fanfare is basically to create a unified Sushan clan. However, after the trial, the alliance between Chen and Chu has become a certain political direction. It is really unwise to pour cold water on it at this time. It may be regarded as a model and criticized. What's more, he supports the alliance at one moment and does not support the alliance at the other. From then on, the poetic lunatic in the capital may become a real lunatic. You cannot say it directly, otherwise you will be caught as a typical person, and you cannot not say it, otherwise you may not live in peace for a few years. With Miss Li here, there shouldn't be any problems with this matter. This can be regarded as a way to save the country. Tang Ning looked at Prince Run and was a little curious about how delicious her food was, so that the prince, who was used to eating delicacies from all over the world, was so nostalgic. Could it be that he is used to eating big fish and eating a few ordinary meals from time to time, and has become addicted to it? King Run finished his meal and said, "I'll come back to you the day after tomorrow." "I won't be at home the day after tomorrow." Tang Ning looked at him and asked, "Aren't you going to the Kyanglan banquet the day after tomorrow?" King Run shook his head and said, "There was nothing delicious at the Kyanglan banquet. I've long been tired of it. It's better to have assorted pots." He doesn't like to eat delicacies from the mountains and seas, but he never forgets the assorted pots. King Run is probably like those wealthy people in later generations who are used to eating big fish, and gradually become interested in farm game. The Kyanglan banquet is coming soon, and on the night of the banquet, in addition to the new champion, the important military officials of the court will also be invited to the palace to participate in this grand event. Tomorrow was the Kyanglan banquet, but now, many ministers in the court and scholars from the Hanlin Academy gathered in the palace. In a certain palace, many courtiers gathered together, including King Lianduan, King Kong, and King Huai, who were also standing on one side. Negotiations on alliance with Chu state have stalled, and His Majesty summoned them urgently to discuss this matter. An official came forward and said, "Your Majesty, I think that the attitude of the Chu envoys has changed. Either the situation on the grassland has changed, or they have other plans." Another official said, "No matter how they change, the alliance will be of great benefit to Chu. If this matter is shelved, they will be the first to worry. Your Majesty, I think Master Wei is right. Chu state must be more anxious about this matter than us. We just need to wait and see what happens." The internal officials expressed their opinions. Emperor Chen sat on a high position. After listening to what they said, he was silent for a moment and said, "You go down first. This matter will be discussed after the Qianglin banquet." After he finished speaking, he looked at Duan Wang and the other three people and said, "You three stay. I'll take my leave." After bowing, many officials walked out of the hall one after another. In the corner, an official pushed the man who was sleeping against the pillar and said, "Master Xiao Fang, don't sleep anymore, let's go." The man opened his eyes, yawned, and bowed to him, "Thank you." After the officials inside left, Emperor Chen looked at Duan and Wang and the other three and asked, "You can each share your views on what happened just now." King Duan thought for a while and said, "Back to my father, I think that the longer this matter is delayed, the better it will be for us. When the Sushan people really endanger the Chu state, we can offer higher terms." King Kong was not willing to be outdone. After King Duan shut up, he immediately stepped forward and bowed, "Father, I think that since the envoys of the Chu state are so repeated, it is better to wait until the Sushan people become powerful and the Chu state is unable to resist. If we join forces and send troops, wouldn't we be able to kill two birds with one stone?" King Huai opened his eyes, clasped his fists and said, "Father, I think the two royal brothers are right." Emperor Chen looked at them, waved his hand and said, "I understand, you all can go down." After the three people left, he leaned back on the chair and sighed. What he wants to hear is the thoughts of the three of them. Even if they are wrong, it means that they have seriously thought about the matter, instead of just repeating the remarks of the courtiers and focusing on intrigues and power struggles. He closed his eyes, rubbed his eyebrows, and heard footsteps coming from inside. "Father, I'm here to bring you food." King Run came over with a wooden plate in his hand, with oil stains on his mouth, followed by a panicked little eunuch. Chen Huang looked at him, deliberately sullen, and asked, "Did you enter indoors today?" "I'm sorry, father, hurry up and eat." "I'll go pay my respects to my mother and concubine." King Run put the wooden plate on the table and was about to leave. "Stop!" Chen Huang stood up, looked at him, and said, "What book did you memorize today? Let me memorize it for your father." Zhao Yuan paused, knowing that he might not be able to escape this time. He stood on the spot with his hands behind his back and said, "Father, I memorized a book for a while today, and then, I was thinking about one thing." Chen Huang walked up to him and asked, "What do you want to do?" Zhao Yuan rolled his eyes and said, "I was thinking about how to fight those bad guys on horseback on the grassland." Chen Huang bent down, touched his head, and asked, "What did Yuan think of?" Zhao Yuan had a look of contemplation on his face and said, "Those bad guys on the grassland, they have the finished division, the stock division, and the tiger division. I heard people say that the finished division is the most powerful. Then we will secretly sell food and weapons to the stock department and the tiger department, and let them finish attacking the egg department. In this way, they will attack their own people and will not come to attack us." Chen Wang's hand was still on Prince Run's head. He looked stunned and murmured, "Wanyan department, Jiaga department, Shuhu department." King Run nodded like a chicken pecking at rice, Yes, this is the butt and tiger." Chen Huang was stunned for a long time before he came back to his senses. He looked at King Run and asked, "Who did you hear this from?" King Run looked up at him and said without changing his expression, "I figured it out myself." Zhao Yuan's eyes were darting around. If he told his father that he listened to the person who cooked delicious food and a beautiful sister, his father would let him endorse it? He was not that stupid. Chen Huang smiled and asked, "Is the food he cooks delicious?" Zhao Yuan smiled honestly and asked, "Who cooked the food?" Emperor Chen touched his head again and said, "How about your father letting him come into the palace and cook for you every day?" Zhao Yuan was stunned and said happily, "Really?" Emperor Chen would naturally not let the new champion enter the imperial kitchen to work, but what he said was that secretly supporting the weak forces among the Sushan people and consuming the strength of the Wanyan tribe seemed to be a better strategy than forming an alliance with the Chu state. It could not only prevent the rise of Wanyan department can gain huge benefits from it. This kid actually hid his secrets during the test. It's a pity that in terms of position, Chu state seems to be more suitable to do this than Chen state. Many thoughts flashed through his mind instantly. He looked down at King Run's expectant watch and sighed softly. I thought he had enlightened this time, but I didn't expect that Yuaner was still the same Yuaner. Outside the palace, Fang Hong walked out of the palace gate, thinking about the remarks of the officials just now, and felt that something was not right. At a certain moment, he turned to look at the man beside him and asked, "What do you think about the alliance between the two countries?" The man lowered his head and half squinted his eyes, as if he would fall asleep in the next moment. He did not raise his head or look at Fang Hong. He paused for a moment and asked lightly, "If you are from the Wanyan department or the folder Gub and Chuhu, what will they think when they hear that Chen and Chu have formed an alliance?" Fortunate young gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 201. The alliance between Chen and Chu seems to have come to a standstill. Both the government and the public, as well as the people, have become less enthusiastic about this matter. However, Tang Ning knew very well that they had just shifted the alliance from the open side to the secret side, and focused on promoting internal strife among the Sushan people. Emperor Chen summoned the envoys of the Chu state yesterday and reached a preliminary agreement. Probably the two countries would choose one of the two tribes, Jiagu and Chuhu, to support them to consume the strength of the Wanyan tribe. If this method is effective, it will become the long-term policy of the two countries towards the grassland. The top brass of both countries were concerned about these matters, and Tang Ning had to make preparations to attend today's Qianglan banquet. In the morning, he took the time to visit the house. If the weather was good and the construction progress was normal, he would be able to move in soon after the Qianglan banquet. Xiaoi and Xiru will still live in the county government office for the time being. They will not move in until June. The beginning of June is an auspicious day. Compared with the Qianglan banquet, this is what he is looking forward to more. Well done, let's give you a copper coin to eat. When walking back to the county government office, he threw a piece of silver to the little beggar on the street, and bought a jar of wine for the old beggar before going back with Peng Chen. Speaking of which, he hadn't seen Lu Laoer and the others for a while. Since coming to the capital, they have never looked for him again. They have been really busy during this period. After today, he will look for them again to ask about the situation. On the street, the little beggar looked at the broken silver in the bowl. After a moment of confusion, he quickly picked it up in his hand. Suddenly there was a huge force behind him, and his body flew out and fell to the ground. A beggar came over, picked up the broken piece of silver, looked at him, and said, "Next time if you let me see it, I will interrupt you. If your leg is broken, you can ask for more." The little beggar got up tremblingly. The beggar looked at him and said coldly, "Go to another street." Not far away, Lu Laoer leaned against a corner, pointed at the little beggar, and said to a beggar next to him, "You continue to follow him today, don't lose him again, and you must find where their lair is." "Yes, elder." The beggar responded, walked to the street, and hung far behind the little beggar. Lu Laoer poked the person beside him and asked, "Old Ren, do you think the government can take care of this matter?" "It's hard to say." Ren Pingsheng shook his head and said, they abducted these children to the capital and forced them to beg on the streets. For so long, no one from the government has taken care of them. This shows that they are confident and must have a backing in the capital. Lu Lao frowned and said, but if we don't deal with them, we won't be able to complete the task assigned to us by the gang leader. Ren Pingsheng thought for a while and said, wait until tomorrow and ask the gang leader. Just as Lu Lao was about to speak, a beggar behind him suddenly poked his shoulder and said in shock, Elder, look over there, that little beggar over there. Lu Lao looked in the direction of his finger and saw a small figure slowly moving out of a narrow alley in front of him. It was a little beggar. When he moved to the entrance of the alley, he looked around cautiously, and then quickly ran to the door of the bun shop next to him. Lu Lao rubbed his eyes to confirm that he had read correctly. With a look of ecstasy on his face, he strode towards that side. The little beggar was holding a bun in his hand and was about to leave. When he saw several beggars walking towards him not far away, a trace of panic appeared on his face and he quickly ran towards the alley where he came from. Lu Lao was startled, and then immediately said, hurry up and chase him, we must find him. The little beggar was running around in the alley, sometimes going left and sometimes right. He seemed to be very familiar with the terrain here. After a while, he ran out of an alley near the city gate. At this moment, a voice suddenly came from the front. You're pretty good at hiding. We've been looking for you for several months. I'll see where you go this time. Seeing the two beggars in front of him, the little beggar's expression changed again. He quickly turned his head and ran into the alley, only to find that there were two other beggars standing behind him. A beggar crossed his arms across his chest and taunted, you're running, why don't you run? I'll break your legs when you get back and see how you keep running. He waved his hand and said, what are you still doing? Take him back. Further away, Lu Lao and others watched the scene from a distance. A beggar asked hurriedly, Elder, what should we do? Lu Lao thought for a while and said, we will follow them. You quickly go to the county government office to report to the gang leader. We will meet at the old place then. The beggar ran all the way to the county government office, supported the stone lion in front of the county government office, pointed at a government servant, and said loudly, I'm looking for help, Mr. Tang. The Yamen servant recognized him as the beggar from last time and said, the number 1 scholar has gone to a banquet. You can come back tomorrow. The Kyanglan banquet is held in the evening, and all important banquets are night banquets. It was not yet noon, but Tang Ning was already in the palace. He almost forgot that although the banquet was in the evening, on the day of the Kyanglan banquet, the new Jinchi would enter the palace before noon, put on the Jinchi crowns prepared by the court, set out from the palace, walk around the capital, and finally go back to the palace. Return to the palace. This is probably the most shameless moment for the new Jinchi. By then, almost all the people in the capital will gather on the main street, and the restaurants on both sides of the street will definitely be overcrowded, especially the second floors next to the street, where the seats have been reserved a few days ago. Although it sounds like people are queuing up to be seen, even so, there are countless people who would rather miss this opportunity. After going through a series of procedures such as roll call in the palace, Tang Ning, wearing the crown of the champion, rode a horse and slowly walked out of the palace gate. Only the top-ranked candidates in the palace examination were qualified to ride horses. This time, there were only Tang Ning and Xiaoju. Gu Bai and Kui Lang could only follow behind on foot. Xiaoju lagged behind him by a body length, fiddled with the big red flower on his chest for a few times, and muttered, this thing is too ugly. Tang Ning also wore a big red flower on his chest, which was a little bigger than Xiaoju's. Everyone followed behind, but the two of them were the only ones wearing big red flowers on horses, which looked a little weird. And since walking out of the palace gate, the streets were filled with people from the capital, and cheers were heard. When passing by the two-story buildings on the street, there were also girls throwing handkerchiefs down. That's the champion, so handsome, a real talent. Don't be lustful, I heard that the champion is married, you have no chance. What do you mean no chance? Being a concubine is also possible. You can consider Xiao Xiaogong, he is not married yet. You don't know, I heard that Xiao Xiaogong, he. On both sides of the road, people lined the road to welcome them, the guards in front led the way, followed by more than 200 new scholars, only the two of them were riding horses. Tang Ning felt that the scene must be very pretentious, but it was a pity that he couldn't see it. The four major happy events in life are rain after a long drought, meeting an old friend in a foreign land, wedding night, and passing the imperial examination. Tang Ning has already passed the imperial examination, and he is riding a horse on the imperial street. The wedding night is not far away, such a thing will not happen again in life. In the crowd, a beggar saw the figure riding on the horse, and after a moment of surprise, he quickly squeezed forward.